In the world now, the United States is honoring the nearly 3,000 lives lost during the September 11, 2001 attack on American soil. Let's look at the global impact 23 years after. Foreign Affairs correspondent Moyo Thomas joins me live from our Abuja studio. A lot has happened in the past 2 decades plus, Moyo, especially the evolution of United States relations with African countries like Nigeria. Walk us through how much impact this significant incident has had across the world 23 years after.
So I would say the most significant impact it has had is the definition or redefinition of terrorism, of the word terrorism, and the coming into contact of a lot of people with terrorist attack. That was what 9/11 was to a lot of people globally. And we can say from that point, what the world meant by security alert changed. Airports changed the security measures, going into countries, going into open field. Everybody became more conscious of how easy it is or it could be to penetrate anywhere if you penetrate US. So for me, I would say, and I spoke with an expert earlier today too that was also on the same line, that it really redefined how the world perceived terrorism and security generally. It also led to the proliferation of terrorist groups, terrorist gangs. From Al-Qaeda, we started seeing ISIS, we started seeing Boko Haram, even down to Africa here and the Sahel, and the impact it has brought around the world. 2001 was the peak and the start point of this particular measure. So going forward, the world has made effort to ensure that it tightens security and work harder, and we can only hope that the effort continues to yield impact.
Absolutely, Moyo, and a lot have been said as to the hit that the African continent is also taking from this terrorist, the implication of this anniversary for Nigeria's own national security strategy, and how our country can also begin to learn from global best practices. Moyo Thomas live for us in Abuja. Let's turn to other stories now. In Mexico, where the Senate has approved a controversial judicial reform under which judges will be elected by popular vote. Its supporters say the changes will make judges more accountable to the Mexican people. The bill triggered strikes and protests, with demonstrators earlier breaking into the building where the vote was due to take place. During a dramatic late-night session, the debate had to be paused when protesters chanting the judiciary would not fall stormed the chamber where senators were gathered. After the lawmakers moved to a different building, the vote went ahead in the early hours of today. Strikes continue in Lebanon as Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank arrests 30 Palestinians in Hebron, Jenin, Ramallah, and Bethlehem area. 27 more Palestinians have been killed across Gaza, including 13 in an attack on a residential building in Khan Yunis, as world leaders condemn the bombing of Al-Mawasi safe zone in the south. We have more in this report.
Israeli forces have killed 27 more Palestinians across Gaza, including 13 in an attack on a building in Khan Yunis, as world leaders condemn the bombing of Al-Mawasi safe zone in the south. The U.S. made 2,000-pound Mk-84 bombs in Al-Mawasi, killed at least 19 people and wounding 60 others. The overnight strikes were heavy and extensive. Huge explosions were heard across southern Lebanon, with at least 20 Israeli airstrikes in the span of just a few hours. The Israeli army is saying it hit about 30 rocket launchers as well as other military infrastructure belonging to Hezbollah in 4 different locations in southern Lebanon, adding that they pose a direct threat to Israeli civilians. Meanwhile, 1,400 lorries filled with emergency aid are currently waiting just outside of Gaza. Israel only lets around 50 lorries in every day, which is far from enough to properly support the civilians in Gaza. In Gaza, eyewitnesses and survivors of the airstrikes recounted painful stories of the first moment when they were buried underground due to the force of the airstrikes. After 11 months of hostilities, more than 600,000 young people in Gaza are being deprived of access to formal education for another year, a United Nations spokesperson said.
As you may have heard, would have marked the start of a new school year in Gaza. However, after 11 months of hostilities, more than 600,000 young people are being deprived of access to formal education for another year. The UN Relief and Works Agency says no official schooling is available in any of its 200 schools, with many of them being used as shelters for displaced Palestinians. The agency says its teams are still providing recreational activities and psychosocial support in some of its schools.
UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said that today would have marked the start of the new school year in Gaza. The spokesperson also reiterated that the UN and its partners are continuing efforts to protect children against the polio virus, with the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reporting that partners concluded the second phase of the vaccination campaign yesterday in southern Gaza. Also on vaccination, more than 256,000 children under 10 years in Khan Yunis and Rafah were reached over a period of 4 days during the second phase of the vaccination campaign. According to the United Nations, the initial round of the campaign is now almost 70% complete, with more than 446,000 children vaccinated out of 640,000 targeted during this first round. The second round of vaccination is expected to start in about 4 weeks this time.
A 1,700 inmates in England and Wales have been released early as part of government scheme to ease overcrowding in prisons. The government says offenders jailed for violent offences with sentences of at least 4 years, sex offenders and domestic abusers were not eligible for early release. Reactions have trailed their release as citizens say not all victims of crime were made aware of their offenders' early release date, warning that some victims may not have had the opportunity to seek protective measures. In Liberia, the Justice Ministry says 47 inmates have escaped from a maximum facility prison, adding that it was taking all necessary measures to ensure their recapture. Initial investigations showed the detainees were able to flee because of a breach in the prison security system. The National Police Force has deployed additional officers to aid the search operation and called on prisoners to turn themselves in to avoid facing additional charges and warned members of the public not to come to their aid. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the Nigerian Correctional Service says it's taking measures to manage the fallout from severe flooding that has impacted its medium security custodial center in Maiduguri, Borno State. The flooding, caused by the overflow and collapse of a Lao Dam in Kunduga local government area of the state, has led to disruptions and threats to the facility. In response to the crisis, the Customs Service has launched, or Correctional Service rather, has launched an emergency plan that includes evacuating inmates to safer facilities, coordinating with security and emergency agencies for support and ensuring continuous operation of its services. Now, the Democratic Republic of Congo says it's received 50,000 doses of smallpox vaccine from the United States, which arrived a week after the first batch arrived from the European Union. Adults in Equator, South Kivu, and Sankuru, the three provinces most affected, will be vaccinated first, starting the second day of October. The first batch of smallpox vaccine arrived in the capital of Congo, the center of the epidemic. The 100,000 doses of JYN vaccine manufactured by the Danish company Bavarian Nordic were donated by the European Union through HERA, the Union's Agency for Health Emergencies. Since the start of 2024, 5,549 cases of smallpox have been confirmed on the continent, with 643 associated deaths. representing a sharp increase in the number of infections and deaths compared with previous year's cases in Congo, which accounted for 91% of the total. Most smallpox cases in Congo and Burundi, the second most affected country, involve children under the age